trial was seemingly about. The defense preferred the evidence be laid out by the prosecution, after which they would have 2 closing arguments to refute the allegations. It seems as though what was on trial here was how abused was Josh at home, and how premeditated was Maddie's murder. Nichols was really counting on a conviction on a lesser charge. He was so set on it that he did not present what could have been crucial evidence in order to avoid having to call a witness. Although the Phillips family had hired a neurologist who reported back findings of bilateral frontal lobe lesions, the defense would have been required to call him as a witness in open court, making him subject to cross-examination. For whatever reason, the lesions would never be brought up, although it seems that, if true, such evidence may have offered a startling insight into Josh's behavior. In the defense's opening statement, the key elements presented are that he hit her in the head by accident with a baseball, and the murder occurred because he was afraid he would get in trouble for playing outside before his parents got home. The defense rests without having called any witnesses. The prosecution's case presented the implication that, in the hours surrounding the crime, Josh had viewed and downloaded pornographic images on the computer in his bedroom, although prosecutors did not imply that sex was a mitigating factor in this crime, nor was any evidence of sexual assault present. Maddie's dad, Steve Clifton, testifies that he had banned the girls from playing with Josh due to the age difference and because there had been a few incidents where Josh had made inappropriate comments while the girls were in his presence. There had also been reports that the Cliftons' home had recently been burglarized a few times. The police found evidence that the break-ins had occurred. Steve Clifton had noticed pry marks on the windows, a missing staple gun, but mysterious staples in all kinds of places throughout his home and property, and missing items like that frame missing his picture, the picture that was sitting on the nightstand while Josh helped look for Maddie all week long. The defense's strategy also included 2 closing arguments sandwiched around the prosecution's close. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, Richard Nichols chose to use a closing argument that he had already used in another case that he didn't even win. He stated that although the crime may have sounded like something out of a Stephen King horror novel, it wasn't premeditated, and that was the factor that made this crime manslaughter under the law. He may have committed a monstrous act, but his client wasn't a monster. The defense's minimalist strategy, along with the recycled closing argument, proved unsuccessful this time as well, and in July of 1999, Joshua Patrick Earl Phillips was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Maddie Clifton at 15 years old. He would now be subject to the mandatory life sentence without parole, which he received on August 20th, 1999. At sentencing, the judge declared that he did not see Josh as a child, as his monstrous act made him an adult. After the trial, the judge made some trial evidence public, including an unaddressed, handwritten 1-page letter that was found in the cell in which Josh was housed immediately following his arrest. It included, "I can only imagine how hard this is for you. I can't tell you how sorry and guilty I feel. Every night I think to myself, if only I could have reacted better to the situation and not have been thinking about getting in trouble. I didn't think about the situation. I was stupid and only thought about what trouble I'd be in even though it was an accident. I was so damn stupid. I didn't want my dad angry at me, and I guess I did it to be safe from him. But it wasn't worth it. I made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry. I can only beg for your forgiveness. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Josh has always been sorry and always been remorseful, but the fact that he does not even really ever speak about the details of the case when interviewed does not win over many supporters. The response to his initial appeal was filed on February 6, 2002, and actually sheds more light onto the facts of this case than could be found when researching the original trial, and reiterates the first assertion that the initial blow with the baseball was accidental. The document states the details that follow. A neighbor's grandma saw Josh sneak up on Maddie through a window, but determined it was just child's play. When Josh went outside to help Jesse and Sheila search for Maddie, he was acting normal, but he looked freshly showered. Josh was initially questioned the day after Maddie disappeared. He told investigators that he had seen her, but they hadn't played together. The Phillips shed was searched and their house was searched on 3 separate occasions, although the search dogs never entered into the premises. Josh was interviewed 3 to 4 days after the murder, in his room, laying on his bed. The attack occurred in 3 distinct stages. Initial 3 strikes to the head with the bat, which would have been fatal within 30 minutes. Followed by 2 stabs to the neck. Maddie's windpipe was purposely perforated. Followed by 9 stab wounds inflicted post-mortem. Maddie was removed and returned back to the tomb underneath the waterbed each time. Maddie's little hand clutched a bracket from underneath the bed, proving that she was alive under there for at least some amount of time and could have been saved. We will get back to the show in a minute, but first, a little break. If you're anything like me, every once in a while you may get a crazy idea, like starting a podcast, for instance. When an overwhelming amount of questions such as where do I start? How do I make it sound good? Or how do I get it on iTunes crop up, you can find the support you need with Resonate Recordings. They offer high-quality podcast production and comprehensive podcast launch services that will allow you to save time and launch a professional-sounding podcast in no time. If you're a podcast fan, you have surely heard their work on Sworn, Up and Vanished, and The Cleaning of John Doe. Just think, that could be you one day. From cover art to theme music, equipment recommendations, recording training, mixing, editing, and producing, they will be able to help you meet your podcasting needs. Right now, you can go to resonaterecordings.com to get your first episode produced for free. To get your podcast sounding just how you want it to, go to resonaterecordings.com. Now, back to the show. Appeal or not, the original sentence was confirmed. In 2004, Missy Phillips began seeking a new trial for her son based on his young age, and although she did not find success, Josh would be granted a resentencing hearing due to the 2012 Supreme Court ruling making life without parole sentences unconstitutional for juveniles per the Eighth Amendment. This leaves sentencing up to the judge and takes mandatory life off the table. Rightfully so, Maddie's mom, Sheila, had harsh criticism for the prospect. The defendant now wants a second chance to live a second life. When does Maddie get to appeal her death sentence? Should he ever be released from prison, I pray that I will no longer be on this earth. The resentencing finally began on August 7th, 2017. A new sentence of 40 years plus probation is what the new defense team asked for. This time they would call several high-profile witnesses, including former state attorney Harry Shorstein, who prosecuted the original case. His testimony revolved around the emerging brain science mentioned earlier. He states that, had he known then that juveniles' brains develop way later than previously thought, he may have tried the case differently and not sought the first-degree murder charge. A clinical psychologist testified that he felt Josh was remorseful and rehabilitated, as based on his 19-year prison record, along with the certificates and accolades he'd earned since being incarcerated. He testified that, even knowing all the details of the crime, he felt pretty confident that Josh wouldn't reoffend if released. An Anglican priest also testified that he had met Josh when he was first entering the adult prison system at 15. He was in corrections at that time and said that coming into contact with Josh influenced him positively and helped him evolve into the religious professional he eventually became. Josh himself was able to read a prepared statement of allocution in open court, which stated, "This is for the family of Maddie Clifton. I've wanted to say this for a very long time, and I'm grateful that this chance to do so in person has arrived. I don't pretend to know or understand your pain or to grasp the void I have created in your lives. I can say this, I do understand pain. I've become quite intimate with suffering growing up in prison. I've seen many dark things, and I've been some dark places. Many times throughout this journey, I've come directly close to ending my life just to escape it all. During these times, I was embroiled in a flurry of emotions and feelings: guilt, despair, pain, hopelessness, fear, and shame. Each time I was somehow able to continue on, mostly because I couldn't stand to put my mother through any more trauma. She's been through enough. There were times when I was angry at her because I couldn't end my pain, because of her love. Yet now I'm eternally grateful to her. I'm grateful to her because as I've grown up, I've learned the value of life. I've learned to see the beauty and joy in a world full of strife and experience the truth of unconditional love. I wish to God that I could have known this or understood this when I was 14. Had I, none of this would have come about. I had no clue what life meant, what death meant, nor the depths of suffering that would follow one act. I had no inkling of how long that suffering could last. I hadn't lived long enough to understand the time involved or what suffering really was. Even now, after all these years, it is just unfathomable to me that all this could have occurred. It tears my mind asunder to know that I stole such a precious life from you, from the world. I so wish I could take away your pain. I thank God that I have been able to continue on in life and grow, but not a day goes by that I don't think of what led me to where I'm at. Not in prison, but in life. I pray every day that you are able to live your lives in spite of the injury I have caused you. I'm supremely grateful to have an opportunity for physical freedom. If any joy arises in my heart, it's immediately tempered by knowing that these proceedings bring all involved once again face to face with the horror that occurred in 1998. When I walk the rec yard here in chains, I look to the sky through mesh wiring and I thank God repeatedly for giving me hope. My next breath is always devoted to wishing peace and healing upon you all. My hopes, fears, and wishes probably mean nothing to you, but they are there all the same. May you know peace, may you be free from suffering, and may you feel the love that is the sustenance of life itself. May God bless you and heal your wounds as much as possible. The defense would rest, then Sheila, Jesse, and Steve Clifton would go on to testify about their experiences relating to Maddie's murder and their desire to see Josh remain in prison for life. Although the resentencing concluded in July 2017, it wasn't until November 17th that Judge Wallace reaffirmed the life sentence, fortuitously sidestepping the 40-year sentence requested by the defense. The prosecution focused on victim impact and lack of explanation from Josh. They had used every available opportunity to rehash every gruesome detail of the case to ensure Judge Wallace absorbed the full horror of the crime. Speculation into Josh's true motive comes up as well because when former State Attorney Shorstein was arguing at trial, he presented an alternative to Josh's standard explanation, that there was no baseball game in strike. Instead, Maddie entered Josh's